Sri Lanka's president will resign to make way for a unity government, the Prime Minister's office has said, after tens of thousands of protesters stormed the official residences of both men. Months of frustration and anger at the country's unprecedented economic crisis boiled over at the weekend as occupiers vowed to stay in the palaces until both leaders have been officially removed from office. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's ruinous green agenda has plunged the country into crisis after his 2019 pledge to transform into an organic nation within a decade led to widespread food shortages. Going green has meant going hungry for Sri Lankans after a blanket ban on chemical fertiliser caused domestic production of rice to collapse by 20% while prices doubled, and discontent at the dangerous and damaging march to net zero is spreading west too. Inspired by Canada's liberty-loving truckers, Dutch farmers have created their own freedom convoy in protest at the country's strict green laws. Protests erupted across the border in Germany too as people all over the continent reject the speedy and devastating path to ruin. Neil Oliver, wow, this is one heck of a movement, and surely it must be a wake-up call to politicians here in the UK.
Well, you would think so. What's extraordinary, amongst much else, is the extent to which it's being overlooked by so much of the mainstream media. As you say, these are mass popular movements involving thousands of people. We see it in Sri Lanka, but we also see unrest in the Netherlands, in Italy, in Germany, in Poland, in Albania, elsewhere, but mostly overlooked. You would think it would be some kind of a wake-up call for politicians in the countries in question, but I suspect although they hear it, although they can possibly smell the smoke of approaching fire, the extent to which they can do anything about it, I think it's minimal, because I don't think they're making their own decisions about their own countries. I think they're doing what they're told by others in the banks and so on. What happened in in Sri Lanka was a product of that government following the madness of WEF inspired policies, net zero, the stripping out of fertilizers and all the rest of it, which, as you said in your introduction, led to wholesale strife, collapsing crops and all the rest of it. But you would think, in a sane world, the politicians in each of the countries would respond to the people, but I suspect they won't. We saw something similar in Canada with the truckers' freedom convoys, but look what happened there. Obviously, Justin Trudeau was told to get a grip of that situation. He clamped down on it violently, arrested bank accounts, and took away the funding for that movement. It's a very interesting one to watch. I'm glad you're covering it. I've been paying attention to it also. But I think it's
the most important story internationally over the weekend, I think, Neil. And it's fascinating, isn't it, to see the MSM ignore it until they no longer can. And it reached that tipping point in Sri Lanka.
Well, yes, those were absolutely extraordinary pictures of that movement. There were so many people, and the shots were from such a distance. It was like ants, I thought, moving towards that presidential palace in Colombo. But then, amazingly, really, what happened around that pool, the presidential pool, which was obviously the people's pool, because it's their presidential palace. But it looked incredibly peaceful. And I think that that's a testament to the reality of what's actually going on there. But it's so interesting to watch. Yes, it's been completely overlooked by the mainstream media. They're still not paying attention to what's happening in Europe, but it will get to a point where it cannot be ignored. I think what you're looking at in the Netherlands, for example, is the deliberate dismantling of the landowning class 85% of the land in the Netherlands is held by farmers and has been for generations. And that's an inconvenient situation for globalist leftist politicians who've got other ideas for the land, which is specifically to build houses to cope with the immigration, the levels of immigration that are going on. They've empowered themselves, the politicians, to help themselves to 30% of the Dutch farmers' land. And surprise, surprise, just as I suspect you would or I would if the government came into our homes and said they were taking 30% of everything we owned and had worked for, the farmers have said no. As well they should. It becomes harder and harder. What's happening in Holland? It's being sold as some kind of attempt to cut down on emissions of nitrates. It's not that at all. As far as I'm concerned, and as far as other commentators are concerned, it's a blatant land grab. It gets harder and harder to ignore the intent by leftist globalist governments to return us to some form of feudalism. All these people like us owning property, owning homes, living lives independent of the state. What the intention there is to take people's independence away, take away their property, take away the land. And if you control the farmland, you control the food, and if you control the food, you control the people. So you can plainly see what the agenda is.
Fascinating analysis, Neil Oliver. We will stay on this, as I know you will too. Neil Oliver, thank you
Indeed.
so much.